For 40 years, the world has operated on a single, unshakable assumption. China is the engine that never stops. We were told a story of a $17 trillion miracle, a story of the factory of the world where the lights never turn off, and a consumer market of 1.4 billion people hungry to buy everything the world could produce. We were told that if you weren't investing in China, you were losing money. We were told that the rise of the Chinese middle class was the greatest economic opportunity in human history. But that story is over. This is Hangzhou. Until yesterday, this city was the Silicon Valley of e-commerce. It was the beating heart of the influencer economy, a place where a single live streamer could sell $1 billion of goods in one night. It was the symbol of China's transition from made in China to sold by China. Today, the influencers are fleeing. The factories in Shenzhen are being demolished, and the greatest shopping festival on earth, Singles' Day, has gone silent. What you are witnessing is not just a recession, it is a controlled demolition. While the world watches the collapse of the old China, the China of cheap plastic and frantic consumerism, Beijing is quietly building something else in the shadows. President Xi Jinping is placing a $1.4 trillion bet on a new future, a future that abandons the West's consumer model for something far more ambitious and far more dangerous for the global order. To understand the future, we must first examine the corpse of the present. And there is no clearer crime scene than the Regal International Center in Hangzhou. Spanning nearly 300,000 square meters, this building was designed to be the hive. It is the largest influencer apartment complex in the city. Just 3 years ago, this wasn't just a building, it was a city within a city. At its peak, nearly 20,000 female influencers and live streamers lived and worked right here. They were the queens of the new economy. From these rooms, they generated an economic output comparable to that of an entire small nation. For a newcomer arriving in Hangzhou with a ring light and a dream, getting a key to an apartment here was the first stop for those starting out in the industry. But in 2025, during the annual November 11th shopping event, the Super Bowl of Chinese retail, the Regal International Center feels unusually quiet. Let's talk numbers, because the math is terrifying. In its prime, rent here could reach 50 yen per square meter per month. For a standard 150 square meter apartment, a landlord could pocket as much as 90,000 yen a year. It was easy money. It was guaranteed money. Today, those same apartments are listed for just over 2,000 yen. And even at that fire sale price, nobody wants them. Out of the building's 180 prime units, 147 remain vacant. That is an 81% vacancy rate in the most desirable building in the most desirable industry city in China. It's not just the freelancers. The whales are leaving too. The top live streaming company, Shenzhen Group, abandoned Hangzhou in April, retreating back to Guangzhou. They left behind the Highway Center Building 3, which now stands completely empty. Even the Starbucks downstairs closed due to a loss of customers. When the Starbucks downstairs closes, you know the ecosystem has died. Coffee shops and tech hubs don't close unless the people who drink coffee, the hustlers, the deal makers, the streamers, are gone. Back in 2012, Li Jiaqi could sell 21.5 billion yen in a single day. Via bought a mansion for 35 million yen, aiming for even greater success. We all thought we could be them. But the gold rush is over. Now, products are increasingly cheaper, traffic is down, and incomes have significantly dropped. The final nail in the coffin came in June with the introduction of the new e-commerce tax. For years, this digital economy operated in a gray area. Now, the government has come to collect. Business owners are now trapped by massive inventories and sky-high return rates. And waiting in the wings is a new army of fresh graduates, desperate for work, willing to stream for lower salaries, driving competition to a breaking point. If the empty apartments are the body, the 11/11 shopping festival is the heartbeat. And this year, the patient flatlined. November 11th, Singles Day. It used to be a day of madness, billions of packages moving across the country. But listen to the reality on the ground. Delivery drivers, the very backbone of 11/11, reported barely any orders. One driver admitted that if he didn't mention the date, a lot of people wouldn't even know it was a holiday. Whether it's from the malls or the delivery drivers, there's nothing. The streets are empty. Rumors circulated that e-commerce giant JD.com required all drivers to be online, anticipating a surge. But drivers found themselves staring at blank screens. When an order finally came through, they were almost shocked because they weren't used to it anymore. Drivers who woke up at 4:30 a.m. found it wasn't worth the lost sleep. One driver reported 160 orders today. Yesterday, 180. The biggest shopping day of the year was actually slower than a regular Tuesday. The platforms know it. For the first time, major players like Taobao, Tmall, Douyin, and Pinduoduo refused to disclose their sales data for this year's November 11th. They claimed it was to avoid comparisons. But in the world of business, silence is a confession. You don't hide record-breaking numbers. You hide failure. Why aren't people buying? Because the trust is gone. The constant price wars have squeezed profit margins to the limit. Businesses can't afford real discounts anymore, so they inflate the original price and offer a fake discount to create the illusion of a bargain. But the Chinese consumer of 2025 is sophisticated. They see through the trick. According to the Baidu Search Index, interest in November 11 has declined for 6 consecutive years. In 2025, it dropped by a sharp 60% compared to its peak. This brings us to the most disturbing shift of all. It's not just that people can't spend, it's that they don't want to. Consumers are saying there's nothing worth buying, and the discounts are fake. They no longer hold on to the fantasy of big sales. No longer holding on to the fantasy. That is the phrase that should terrify global economists. The Chinese economic miracle was built on the fantasy that tomorrow would be richer than today. That fantasy fueled the property market, the stock market, and the consumption habits of 1 billion people. But with housing prices falling, millions of families are facing negative mortgage rates. They owe the bank more than their home is worth. Their wealth has evaporated. When your main asset is underwater, you don't buy a new iPhone on Singles Day. You save. You survive. The digital dream in Hangzhou is dead. The shopping carts are empty. But if you think this is bad, wait until you see what's happening to the backbone of the global supply chain. Because 800 miles away, in the city that makes your phone, your computer, and your clothes, the lights are going out. Before we take you inside the empty factories of Shenzhen, I have a question for you. We are seeing consumption downgrading destroy the retail market here in China. Are you seeing similar signs of fake discounts and spending fatigue in your own country? Let me know in the comments below. I read every single one. And if you appreciate us uncovering the data that the platforms tried to hide, hit that like button right now. It helps this truth reach more people. Now, come with me to Shenzhen, where the collapse is physical. If Hangzhou is the capital of live streaming e-commerce, the stage for the most vibrant online influencer economy, then cities like Shenzhen are the essential backbone that keeps the entire machine running. For decades, Shenzhen was the factory of the world. It housed the most complete manufacturing system in the country, possessed the fastest supply chain response capabilities, and boasted the densest concentration of innovation tech companies. From research and development to production, from warehousing and logistics to cross-border trade, Shenzhen was the underlying operating system of the e-commerce world. But today, this industrial powerhouse is undergoing an unprecedented transformation. Industrial parks that once had long waiting lists for tenants now sit vacant or are up for lease. The once bustling streets are lined with signs offering subleases, a desperate attempt by landlords to fill the void. Young people who used to flock here dreaming of work and entrepreneurship are fleeing Shenzhen. The city is grappling with labor shortages, rising unemployment, and a slowdown in economic growth, leading to public criticism that Shenzhen is now dragging the country behind. To understand the scale of this collapse, look at the job market. In the first quarter of 2025, the number of resumes sent out in Shenzhen surged by a staggering 87%. Year on year, the number of newly registered unemployed people has risen dramatically. Remember, this is Shenzhen, a first-tier city, the crown jewel of China's economic miracle. Now, you can walk around and see a large number of stores up for lease, office buildings sitting vacant, and small companies shutting down one after another. Even big companies are cutting salaries and laying off employees. Those lucky enough to keep their jobs are forced to take on the workload of 2 or 3 people. If you want to quit, you have no easy way out, especially if you have elderly parents and young children to support. You end up becoming a helpless tool, stuck in a job without any options. So, where do the unemployed go? Do they find new careers? No, they flood the gig economy. The most saturated professions in Shenzhen right now are ride-hailing drivers, food delivery workers, and couriers. Many of the unemployed have chosen these low-barrier jobs as a temporary solution. But now, even these sectors are heavily saturated, and the competition is fierce. In a high-cost city like Shenzhen, ordinary wages can barely cover the cost of living, let alone expenses like tutoring, clothes, or toys. People feel that no matter how hard they work, everything is tough, and money is just too hard to earn. Over the past 4 decades, Shenzhen achieved remarkable growth through 4 key pillars: the expansion of manufacturing, thriving foreign trade, demographic dividends, and innovation-driven industries. But that era is over. With changes in the foreign trade environment, the restructuring of global supply chains, and rising costs, the days when an industrial park could simply house a hot-selling factory have come to an end. Small and micro manufacturers are being forced to relocate. The industrial chains that once supported the prosperity of these parks are undergoing a painful redistribution. There is a shortage of labor, and manufacturing profits are shrinking. The economic trauma has manifested in strange, unsettling ways across the city. Since January of this year, the number of unusual phenomena in Shenzhen has been increasing. First, finding a job has become harder, and the number of unemployed people is growing visibly. Second, there is the traveler illusion. Many people in social circles appear to be traveling, making it seem like everyone is wealthy. In reality, many are staying in hotels simply because they have lost their jobs and have nowhere else to go. Third, and perhaps most chilling, when you walk on the street, you rarely see pregnant women anymore. In a culture that values family above all, this is a grim barometer of future confidence. Fourth, even the backup plans are failing. Ride-hailing drivers, delivery workers, and street vendors are all struggling. Fifth, more and more physical stores are up for lease, but even those with no transfer fees, which used to be snatched up instantly, aren't being taken over. Sixth, the real estate market is frozen. New homes in Shenzhen are not selling, and the second-hand market isn't looking good either. Wealthy people have stopped spending and are hoarding cash in banks, while those who actually want to spend have no money left. Seventh, an increasing number of young people are choosing to lie flat, choosing not to work, not to buy homes, and even not to marry. Foreclosed homes and bad assets are becoming more common. More and more people are drowning in debt, unable to pay credit cards, car loans, or mortgages. You might wonder, even though the pandemic era is over, why is this still happening? How much longer can people hold out? The true state of Shenzhen is hard to believe if you only look at the skyscrapers, but look deeper. In a city where the average monthly wage is just over 6,000 yen, many people are paying over 10,000 yen a month for their mortgage. The math simply doesn't work. Many office workers are stuck in a cycle of shifting debt around, paying just enough on their credit cards to maintain their credit score, living on the edge. In reality, life in Shenzhen has become about one thing: just hanging on. Official statistics say that the average annual income in Shenzhen is over 300,000 yen. But in reality, the average debt per person is probably closer to 300,000 yen. The sales slump during November 11th is not the end. It is a reflection of China's broader economic decline. Looking back at the chain of events, from the decline of Shenzhen's manufacturing industry to the sales downturn during the shopping festivals, it is clear that China's economy is facing an unprecedented structural recession. This is not a short-term cyclical fluctuation. This is the concentrated eruption of long-standing contradictions. The decline of influencers, the demolition of factories, and the abandonment of industrial parks have shattered the myth of the world's factory. The mass exodus of influencers from Hangzhou and the fall of live streaming e-commerce marked the collapse of the digital economy bubble. These crises, the bursting of the real estate bubble, the aging population, the blow to global trade, and weak domestic demand, will inevitably lead to a tipping point. But while the people of Shenzhen and Hangzhou struggle to survive the winter, the government in Beijing is not planning a rescue. They are planning a pivot. They are looking at this wreckage not as a disaster, but as a necessary shedding of dead skin. The old economy must die so the new one can live. And the plan they have for what comes next is a $1.4 trillion gamble that involves new quality productive forces. The silence in Hangzhou and the empty factories in Shenzhen are not just symptoms of a crash. They are the debris of a controlled demolition. The Chinese government sees the pain of the influencers, the delivery drivers, and the migrant workers, but they are choosing not to intervene with the kind of massive consumer bailout the West expects. Why? Because in the eyes of Beijing, the era of growing rich through selling lipstick on live streams and building endless apartments is over. The collapse of the digital economy bubble and the bursting of the real estate market are seen by the state not as tragedies, but as a necessary purging of low-quality growth. The government has correctly identified that the old engine, debt-fueled real estate and low-end manufacturing, is broken beyond repair. To replace it, President Xi Jinping has unveiled a new, ruthless economic doctrine. It has a name that sounds bureaucratic, but carries the weight of a $1.4 trillion ambition. New quality productive forces. This is the great pivot. The plan is simple, but dangerous. Instead of stimulating domestic consumption to help the people buying 50% off goods on Singles' Day, the state is pouring all its resources into the supply side, specifically into high-tech manufacturing. They are betting everything on 3 new pillars to replace the old pillars of property and cheap exports: electric vehicles, EVs, lithium batteries, and solar cells. This explains the paradox of the Chinese economy in 2025. While the streets of Shenzhen are filled with unemployed workers, the automated factories of BYD and CATL are running 24/7. While the e-commerce platforms hide their sales data in shame, the export data for green technology is exploding. Beijing's logic is cold and strategic. They believe that controlling the means of the future, energy, transportation, and artificial intelligence is more important than the short-term happiness of the consumer class. They are willing to let the unprecedented structural recession burn through the service sector if it means emerging as the dominant technological superpower. Take the electric vehicle sector. It is the crown jewel of this new strategy. By subsidizing the entire supply chain, from the lithium mines to the battery plants to the final assembly, China has created a juggernaut that Western car companies simply cannot compete with on price. This wasn't an accident of the free market. It was a decision made in the halls of power in Beijing to corner a strategic industry, regardless of profitability. But this strategy has a fatal flaw, one that connects directly back to the empty wallets of the people in Hangzhou. By suppressing wages and focusing solely on production, the government has created a massive imbalance. China is now producing far more goods than its own people can afford to buy. The weak domestic demand mentioned in the economic reports is a direct result of this policy. If the Chinese people can't buy these new high-tech products, who will? The answer is you, the world. This brings us to the semiconductor war. While EVs are the offensive weapon, chips are the defensive shield. Beijing knows that its reliance on Western technology is a strategic weakness. The tipping point the economy faces is not just financial, it's geopolitical. The government is pouring billions into legacy chip production, aiming to flood the market with the foundational semiconductors that run everything from your washing machine to your car, creating a new layer of global dependency. So, the narrative comes full circle. The reason the government isn't saving the Regal International Center or the 11/11 Shopping Festival is because those things represent the old China, a China that integrated into the West system as a subordinate factory and consumer. The new China, driven by new quality productive forces, wants to rewrite the system. They are trading the prosperity of the influencer for the power of the engineer. They are trading the vibrancy of the consumer market for the dominance of the industrial supply chain. But here is the danger. You cannot build a superpower on a foundation of negative mortgage rates and falling housing prices. You cannot have a high-tech future when your youth unemployment is so high that graduates are fighting for delivery driver jobs that don't even exist anymore. The government is betting that it can export its way out of this crisis. They are betting that the world will absorb their excess capacity. But as we will see, the world is closing its doors. And when the doors close, the pressure inside the system, the pressure of debt, aging, and unemployment, will have nowhere to go but to explode. The structural recession in China is not an isolated event happening behind a firewall. It is a mass-scale re-engineering of the global economy that will crash onto the shores of the United States and Europe. For 30 years, the West viewed China as a deflationary machine, a place that kept prices low at Walmart and Amazon. But as Beijing pivots to new quality productive forces, the nature of the relationship is changing from symbiotic to parasitic. The restructuring of global supply chains mentioned in the economic reports is already underway. As manufacturing costs rise and the business environment in China becomes hostile to the old model, we are seeing a blow to global trade. The factory of the world is closing its doors to the low-end production that stabilized Western inflation for decades. This creates a terrifying dilemma for the United States. As China floods the market with state-subsidized high-tech goods, from EVs to advanced batteries, it is exporting its own deflation. This threatens to wipe out the nascent industrial base that the U.S. is trying to rebuild. The factories closing in Shenzhen are a warning. If China can't employ its own workers, it will try to employ yours by destroying your local industries with underpriced goods. The tipping point is here. The crisis of the real estate bubble and the aging population has backed Beijing into a corner. They have no choice but to double down on export-led growth in high-tech sectors. This means the trade wars of the last few years were just the warm-up. The real economic war is just beginning. For the global investor, the lesson from the empty Regal International Center is clear. The days of easy growth in China are gone. The digital economy bubble has burst. The myth of the world's factory is shattered. The smart money is no longer betting on the rise of the Chinese middle-class consumer, because that consumer is drowning in debt and fear. Instead, the world must prepare for a China that is desperate, heavily armed with industrial capacity, and willing to cannibalize global markets to save itself. The silence in the streets of Hangzhou, the blank screens of the delivery drivers, and the for-lease signs in Shenzhen are not just symbols of a domestic recession. They are the early warning signals of a global fracture. The ship has turned. The $17 trillion engine is sputtering. And as it stalls, It threatens to drag the entire global economy down with it. The question is no longer, when will China rise? The question is, what happens when it falls? The choice for the West is simple: decouple and face higher prices, or remain integrated and face industrial extinction. As the Chinese people learned this Singles' Day, the fantasy is over. Now, the reality begins. This documentary took hundreds of hours of research to piece together the fragments that mainstream media often ignores. We dug through the data blackouts so you can see the storm before it hits. If you believe this story needs to be heard, please share this video with just one friend or investor who cares about the future of the global economy. And if you want to stay ahead of this massive wealth transfer, click that subscribe button and turn on notifications. We are already investigating the next domino in this chain reaction, and you cannot afford to miss it. The links to our sources are in the description. I'll see you in the next investigation.